prescription for the world's poor. According to suit of USC, because price controls would lower drug prices, they would also reduce the overall revenues of American pharmaceutical companies by 26%. This harms the developing world in three ways. First, by reducing research. According to Loeb Ryerson University, high American drug prices have allowed drug companies to spend 2/3 of their additional revenues on global research and development. Specifically, the AMF reports that research on diseases that primarily afflict the developing world has doubled in the last decade, with big pharmaceutical companies like Novartis and Merck devoting half their R&D spending to these high-priority, low-profit drugs. This trend is crucial, as the IPI quantifies that these newly researched drugs and vaccines will save 9 million lives over the next 25 years. However, according to Vernon of UPenn, with price controls, drug companies will be forced to cut R&D by 48% in response to lower revenues, with Forbes specifying that research on these neglected diseases will be cut first, since it yields the lowest profits as the population it assists is poorer. Most importantly, Finkelstein of MIT finds that research on vaccines, critical for the developing world, will be reduced, as every 1% decrease in drug companies' revenue lowers the number of vaccines sold on the market by 3%. This is significant, as the NIH quantifies that every new vaccine for the developing world reduces mortality rates 24%. Second, by cutting donations. Right now, according to Meisen of Syracuse University, drug companies donate a fixed 13% of their annual profits. Meisen explains that these donations go primarily to the developing world, where they are used to set up medical facilities, hire staff, and provide plenty of free medicines and vaccines. According to Forbes, the largest drug companies are the most philanthropic, with Pfizer giving away a fifth of its earnings every year, and other major drug companies following close behind. These donations are meaningful, as just last year, Pfizer alone sent tens of millions of free prescriptions to the developing world, allowing 248 million people to have access to essential medicines. Haque of the University of Malaysia furthers that poor countries depend on these donations, with 20% of their state-run health facilities receiving all their medicine from them. Unfortunately, Mello of Stanford writes that as price controls decrease companies' total revenue, the fixed 13% they donate will be considerably reduced. Third, by decreasing affordability. According to Commodore of UCLA, high drug prices in the US subsidize low drug prices in the developing world. This is because drug sales in the American market alone generate enough profit to allow companies to charge low humanitarian prices in poorer countries. This practice is known as tiered pricing, and has seen widespread adoption in the pharma industry, as most companies are willing to sacrifice some profit to improve their image and give impoverished populations access to otherwise expensive medicines. Commodore quantifies that due to high American prices, developing countries pay just 3% of what America pays for essential medicines, and less than 20% for all other prescription drugs. Thus, the IEA finds that overall, tiered pricing increases global access to drugs by 4 to 7 times. Unfortunately, Mello writes that as pharma companies lose revenue under price controls, they would compensate by raising prices in the developing world. The IEA reports that if drug companies sought to raise revenues by just charging the price that would allow them to break even in the developing world, global access to drugs will decrease by 23%. Flynn of American University explains that access could be limited even further, since poorer countries have high income inequality, which would allow drug companies to maximize profits by charging excessive prices to the rich at the expense of access for the poor. Flynn quantifies that if companies took this approach, 51% of the population will lose access to drugs. According to the WHO, since there are few effective healthcare programs in the developing world, 90% of people pay for drugs out of pocket, meaning that even small price spikes can force families to choose between abandoning treatment or paying for the drug by selling an asset or pulling a child from school, burying their family in intergenerational poverty. Overall, Mello confirms that price controls will be a zero-sum game, where any gain for Americans constitutes a loss for those in the developing world. Thus, we negate.
Can we see big companies with the most philanthropic?
Yeah, for sure.
Can I see 2/3 of budget on?
Wait, let me just do them one by one.
Sure.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's fine. So can I just see low, high prices equal 2/3 R&D?
Okay, wait, one more. Yeah, one more.
Okay. Yeah, just low.
This is
Thanks. Starting prep.
AMM.
Yes.
I mean, they're different parts of well, but it's these three parts.
Which one is this?
Well, I mean not well, AMM.
Okay. Yeah. So where does it say specifically it's going at?
Oh, yeah. So it's a comparison between this and then earlier evidence about how much it was like 5 years ago.
Okay. Can we see that?
Yeah.
All right, and then just the last one, IPR 9 million bucks.
Yeah. IPI.
Yeah. Thanks. About a minute 20 left.
Are y'all cool if I take off my jacket?
Yeah.
I know you're a very old, rigid panel.
I'm taking your seat.
Oh.
Two hands are on.
Hey. Give me a 20.
Okay. Everyone good?
Yeah.
We affirm, and our sole contention is reducing drug prices. Americans pay unreasonably high prices for their medicines, much higher than citizens in other countries. Across a variety of different healthcare systems, Herschler of Reuters reports in 2014 that U.S. prices for the world's top 20 selling medicines are on average 3 times higher than in Britain, 6 times higher than Brazil, and 16 times higher than in India. They go the New York Times further in 2016, we pay roughly twice as much for our drugs as the average for other wealthy countries. This additional cost is not associated with better care. We are just paying more for the same drugs. This trend is only getting worse. Amin of CNBC writes this July, that while drug prices have tripled in the US in the past decade, analysts predict they will double again in the next 10 years. Conventional solutions to high drug prices are also failing now. Bayer of UC Hastings College writes in 2017, when drug patents expire after 20 years, drug manufacturers should be able to produce generic drugs at a lower cost. However, the number of drugs coming off patent is decreasing at a rapid rate, 41% lower than in 2016. This is because companies are using more measures to prevent losing their patents, including paying generic companies not to copy their drugs and securing dozens of patents for their drugs so they won't expire. While Americans need to use the same drugs as the rest of the world, the U.S. government has no way of keeping the cost of those drugs in check. Herschler furthers, the U.S., which leaves pricing directly to market competition, has higher drug prices than other countries where governments directly or indirectly control medical costs. The simple solution would be to impose price controls on prescription drugs, just like how every other country does. This would ensure that every citizen has access to proper medication. Cliff of Vox explains in 2018, other countries regulate the price of drugs because they see them as a public utility. Countries like Australia, Canada, and Britain don't regulate the price of drugs of other things that consumers buy, like computers or clothing, but they've made the decision to regulate the price of drugs to ensure that medical treatment remains affordable for all citizens regardless of income. Lowering drug prices will help combat two serious issues that Americans face, and the first is the opioid epidemic. Gibson of CBS News reports in 2018, as the opioid epidemic continues to kill tens of thousands of Americans each year, the drug naloxone, which reverses the effects of an overdose, has proved invaluable in preventing overdose-related deaths. However, prices have risen more than 50%, and driving that is a surge in overdoses that's boosting demand for naloxone and a dearth of federal rules that could limit price increases. As a result, consumers cannot afford and are not buying the drug. Wood of Harvard Medical School estimates in 2018, in the midst of the epidemic, sales of naloxone increased from 2.8 million annually to only 3.2 million from 2009 to 2015, showing that those most at risk cannot afford this life-saving drug. Lack of access to naloxone has deadly consequences, as Gibson writes that drug overdoses killed a record 72,000 Americans in 2017, up 10% from the previous year. Naloxone is crucial, as overdoses often act far too quickly for a hospital. In the case of heroin, De-Addiction Centers reports the body quite literally forgets to breathe and deprives itself of oxygen, killing the user within a matter of 5 minutes, far before an ambulance could arrive. Second is the non-adherence epidemic. High drug prices have made life-saving medications inaccessible for many Americans. Bornstein 15 reports in the New York Times that 1 in 4 American adults, perhaps 50 million people, fail to fill a prescription they needed because of cost. Even when they do take the drug, patients take less than the prescribed dosage, which renders them less effective. This has disastrous effects on public health. Brody of the New York Times writes in 2018, there's an out-of-control epidemic in the U.S. that affects more people than any disease. This crisis, non-adherence to prescription medications largely because of cost, is estimated to cause approximately 125,000 deaths per year. In fact, Resnick of Health Analytics reports last year the high cost of prescription drugs is what drives 67% of patients into medication non-adherence. Thus, we affirm.
Would someone mind closing the door? Because I think there's other rounds.
It's this
Oh.
I don't think it'll make a difference.
Okay. Some ambient debate.
Alright.
Is it?
Okay. Ready?
I was gonna message them until
Cool.
in the middle of their speech.
Alright, so my first question is there any way your case can link into the developing world?
Yeah.
How?
If you our case.
Your case, yeah.
I mean, yeah. If you make if you make stuff for the developing world.
Yeah.
Probably not.
So your case can't link it.
I mean, we'll see if Daniel cooks up something in rebuttal, but not off the top of my head.
Okay.
We're gonna try linking into your case in other ways.
In other ways? Alright.
Yeah, actually, our case can. The warrants from our case. Daniel will read stuff in rebuttal. Daniel is going to read stuff in rebuttal about that, not directly stuff that we read in case. But the way that price controls,
so not case.
The way that price controls will be implemented in the U.S. will link into your case.
Okay, we can talk about that later.
Sure. So can I ask you a question?
That's fair, yeah.
Okay. So what is the goal of pharma companies?
Goal?
Yeah.
Like, usually to make profit, but at a certain point, like when Pfizer, the largest pharmaceutical company, is swimming in profits, like 42% profit margin, they have the flexibility to do like more humanitarian activities in the developing world. Can I have a question
Sure.
now?
Wait. But let's remember who we're talking about here.
Yeah.
This is the pharma industry.
Yeah.
This is the pharma industry who has jacked up the price of insulin for hundreds of thousands of Americans so they can't afford it. This is the pharma industry.
Yeah,
who literally, hold on.
Yeah, that's
who
fair.
Invented,
that's
who invented
fair.
a cure for
I know, you're gonna use all this like pathos, like the pharma industry is so bad. We're telling you the
They're
facts.
very
I know,
evil.
but like
They're like that music that you played when I walked in.
That's fair. That's fair. But what I'm telling you is that if you look at like the economic facts on the ground in developing countries, pharmaceutical companies are charging drugs below the marginal cost. Which means let me explain that really quick. So if I'm a pharmaceutical company and I ship some drugs out to the developing world, maybe for malaria or tuberculosis, let's say that shipment costs $10. Our evidence explicitly says that they are charging prices for those drugs below the marginal cost, which means below the cost of distributing. They charge for like $8.
So look,
right?
Daniel is going to get up here and read evidence saying that the pharma industry is maximizing profits.
When is that evidence from?
Hold on.
When is it from? Like you just brought up a response. What year?
I'm not exactly sure, but
like our evidence probably postdates it because there are new initiatives starting in the late 2010s.
Wait.
That's why it costs so low.
But the question is, we're both going to read evidence that says they are maximizing profit.
Yeah, but the dates matter,
but
right?
the reason
like if there's
why
a new
I'm
initiative, that would matter.
The reason why I'm asking about their intentions is because the way that you decide a debate when there's clashing pieces of evidence is the warrants debate.
All right,
and the way that you do that is understanding how the
that's
pharma
totally
industry
fair,
works.
and I'm with you on that. But there are two ways to decide. Number one, the dates because they matter, but number two, the warranting also matters. And there are two reasons why they charge low prices. First,
Yeah,
it's
that's
really
right.
good publicity for the UN, right? The UN has recently been pressuring them to like increase access in the developing world. But second, they do want to have like a long-term foothold in these emerging markets. They're called developing countries because at some point they will be developed, and these pharmaceutical companies like do want to sell at low costs so that they can stay in those markets.
Yeah,
Can I have a question about your case?
Yeah.
All right. So I guess on naloxone, you're only impacting to like low-income Americans who can't really purchase the drugs. Like if you're wealthy, then you can buy the drug, right? Or like in the middle class.
Yeah, but it's a lot of people.
Okay.
Particularly opioid users are less well off.
Okay, fair enough.
Alright. So I'm going to start off on weighing. I'm going to start off on weighing, and I'm going to go into their case. Okay. Start off on weighing. This resolution asks us not what America would do, but what America should do. When we contend America ought to take a paradigm of global altruism, helping those that need it most, we say that's the developing world for 3 reasons. 1, because pharmaceuticals matter a lot more to them, because they're less likely to have access to doctors, health clinics, and other means of treatment. That's why Johnson of the Washington Post finds that 67% of health spending in the developing world is on pharmaceuticals compared to 10% in America. 2nd, because people in the developing world are far less likely to live in countries with good government health insurance programs. That's why 90% of them are paying out of pocket for all of their drugs compared to 9% in America. So the list price of a drug matters a lot more if you're paying all of it. But third of all, because they're simply poor. Every $1 increase or decrease in cost matters a lot more if you're making $1 a day rather than $8 an hour. But then, go to their case. They tell you there are a lot of differentials in pricing where the U.S. pays a lot more than other countries. They name like Brazil and other somewhat poorer countries. We're going to tell you in this round that these differentials are good because American consumers comparatively are better off than the other people who are getting lower prices. But then, they tell you that like patents are expiring and that patents are not expiring and that they're instead renewing these patents such that they can continue to have monopolies such that drug prices are driven up. But according to Brendan of the RF, there's a 2013 Supreme Court decision that rules against their ability to be able to pay off other generic companies to delay their patents. And as such, since 2013, this kind of practice has been cut in half. But then second of all, NPR tells you they're hitting a patent cliff, whereby soon 45% of their drugs are going to go off patent in the pharmaceutical industry, and as such, generics will be entering the market. So we tell you the status quo is trending towards lower prices. But regardless, start off on their point about opioids. First of all, according to Business Insider, the list price of naloxone is not as important as how people are actually accessing it. Because, for example, Calio, a company that produces it, has donated 150,000 of them to hospitals, EMTs, and community organizations. And ADAPT has donated 50,000 of them to these organizations and given an unlimited amount for free to schools. And further all these community organizations like hospitals, EMTs, who are distributing the drugs to low-income Americans get it for half the price. But then second of all, when someone, according to Business Insider again, when someone who is poor wants to get this drug, they have now made it this year free for anyone under $100,000. A $0 copay if you have insurance and free if you don't have insurance. So access to this drug is very high in the status quo. But then third, according to Wood of Harvard, there is now a generic version that is just $12. The thing that's expensive is the technology, an expensive delivery device that makes the drug thousands of dollars, but the actual drug that you'd be driving down the price of is just $12 right now. But then third of all, you're going to turn it. Because according to Business Insider, it's very expensive to produce, whereby there's only one manufacturer. But according to Dinner's team, the ACSH, price controls drive down the profit margins of makers such that they exit the market to make more profitable drugs. And because naloxone is so expensive to make and they want to get a $12 profit at the end of the day, we tell you that it's going to cause shortages. And as such, Science Magazine tells you there's already been one shortage of this drug this year. So we tell you that they're actually limiting access. But finally, on the impact level, according to Wiener of Harvard, because naloxone does not fundamentally cure addiction, people continue to abuse the drug after they get revived. And as such, 51.4% of people who are revived via naloxone end up dead in 1 month. Therefore, their impact is severely mitigated. But then, go to their point where they tell you they're going to decrease non-adherence. First of all, according to Weingarten of Forbes, 90% 90% of American drug prescriptions are generics, which are 85% cheaper than brand name drugs, which means in the status quo, comparatively, there is relatively good access to drugs for the American poor. But then further, according to the GAO, prices are being driven down for generics specifically, 59% in the last year, with companies planning to drive down prices 75% cheaper specifically for low-income Americans, with Walmart making all generic prescriptions just $4 and other chains like CVS and Target following. But then further, Janssen of Wharton tells you that insurance covers 85% of drug costs. And remember, 92% of Americans currently have insurance. That's just compared to just 10% in the developing world. And then finally, they tell you 67% of non-adherence is due to cost. But we tell you with NPR, which is a much better study, which analyzes both physicians and actual people, tells you that 10% of non-adherence is due to cost, so don't give them as big of an impact. Thus, we urge you to negate.
Can I see first UN is pressuring pharma companies?
We haven't read that in the speech yet, so when we do.
Well, in rebuttal you said the UN is pressuring pharma. Or, yeah, could I see that?
That was crossfire. When we read it in the speech, we'll show it to you.
Well, I feel like that'd be relevant for my rebuttal. Is that okay?
Like, sure.
Yeah. Thanks, Tony. Alright, is everyone ready? Starting on their weighing, then going to my place. Start off on their weighing. They say we should make this debate a body count because people in the developing world are worse off. We agree people in the developing world are worse off. People in America are bad off too. Look, we're not saying put America first. We're just saying this debate should not be purely a magnitude debate because we're impacting poor Americans too. I would say it's not a very fair comparison to say that the person working at McDonald's who's making less than $8 a day is really that much worse off. And if you tell that person I can't afford drugs, that's not a very good comparison. Instead, I would say as rational policy actors, we should look at the probability debate and which side is much more likely to achieve rational policy reduction. So because we prove that we have a 100% reduction of decreasing prices, as they've conceded in rebuttal that they've read no response that prices won't go down. Prices are guaranteed to go down, which means more people will get access. But they, even if we win a slight defense on their wings, we win the probability debate. Now let's go to our case. First, they say that there's a patent cliff that can lose 45%. That does not matter because companies care about the most profitable drugs. Even if 45% become generics, what they are keeping patents on are the most profitable blockbuster drugs. In fact, according to NBC, the ones that actually cost a lot of money for patients have 71 patents on them and will almost never go into expiry. So prices are still going up. Then let's go to naloxone. So they read this Wiener evidence that says that naloxone has almost no effect on people. We will concede this, which takes out their turn. Now let's go a little further on this idea of non-adherence. So they say that 90% of these drugs are generics. That also does not matter because according to the New York Times, 1% of drugs account for 32% of spending. Again, is the blockbuster drugs that are the real problem. Then they say that there's been a decrease in generics by 59%. That also does not matter because according to the New York Times, for every one price decrease that companies make, they hike up the price for 76 other drugs. Prices are going up for the highest paying drugs. And finally, they say that insurance covers 85%. That obviously is not doing a lot of good because 125,000 Americans are still dying every year because of a lack of cost. Insurance is not solving. Then finally, they say that there's only 10%, but they drop our warrant, which is that 1 in 4 Americans cannot pay for these drugs. Obviously, that means that 67% are not addicted. I don't want to get into that debate, but it means that a significant number of Americans is 125,000. Now let's go to their case. So start on their first one on innovation, where they say that high prices are needed from low. Low just says that high prices subsidize global R&D. It does not say the words developing nations. Global R&D could mean R&D to Europe. But then they say from the AMF that there's been a doubling in the last 10 years. It just says that the drugs are in the pipeline. But as we know very well, many drugs enter the pipeline and never leave the pipeline. That's not a guarantee that there's actual innovation going on. Then they say from the IPR that they've saved 9 million lives. It never says the developing world. It just says that they have saved 9 million lives in general. Here's why none of this applies to the developing world. Because according to The Guardian in 2012, companies do not view the developing world as profitable, and they are not willing to invest in and they are not investing in actual drug-resistant diseases. Now let's go a little deeper, but they say they're going to cut R&D by 48%. This is not true. This is not true. Emmanuel says that they say there's going to be a 26% drop in profit. But Emmanuel says you can go as high as 50% loss in profit and see no change in R&D because these companies are just so profitable. Then let's go a little deeper, where they say that they're going to cut the drug-resistant diseases first. Two responses here. Sorry. First off, they're not going to cut vaccines first because they're not costly at all. Frack explains that actually vaccines are much less costly than traditional pharma because vaccines are just literally the dead diseases, so they don't cost a lot of money to make, so the cost would not go down significantly. But two, you'll actually see an increase in value-based drugs, so you turn their internal link. This comes from Light, who explains that right now, the incentive for pharma companies is to price gouge, not to make incentive-based drugs. That's why 90% of drugs that enter the market have no clinical value over their previous drugs. However, this all changes in a pro-world. Light explains that actually most countries in Europe and what the U.S. proposing right now, according to the Trump administration, is a value-based system in which the price is linked to how much clinical value that they give. And according to Stanford, that is why every European company has better value-based systems, and actually they innovate a lot more and they prioritize these kind of drugs that they're talking about. We turn their internal link. Now on donations. A couple things here. First off, their 13% reflects other factors. Light explains that actually most of these drugs that they're giving are expired drugs that they give for tax deductions. This means two things. A, the drugs don't even work because they're expired, but B means that they will never stop because they will always have expired drugs. Two, we also turn this link because when you see an increase in access, you see an increase in production because you need to produce more for the increased access. So you're actually going to see more expiration in the long term. But three is that now finally, but three, they consider that companies are profit maximizing. But Perkins explains that they are also profit maximizing because of a fiduciary duty. This means they will always give drugs to the developing world. But then let's go to their final link. Then they say that they're having low prices. Two responses. First, they're not low enough. UPenn explains that even though they're giving as low as $10, most countries only have a $3 budget per day, which means that it's still not accessible. But two, because they're profit maximizing, they would never stop the strategy. As they can see in Crossfire, they know that it is profitable for them to invest, which means that they will always invest right now. They say that they're giving them at a discount rate, but that makes no logical sense. Obviously, it is profitable for these companies right now, and there's no point in time in Crossfire. That means that they will never stop. They will never stop doing these drugs. Thank you.
Okay. You ready for Crossfire?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Oh, actually, before Crossfire, could I just see the evidence that Europe and the U.S. both, U.S. wants value-based pricing and the Europe already has value-based pricing?
Yeah.
This is Trump wants to do reference pricing based off
Reference
like off of industrial nations.
I don't need to see that. I just want to see the Europe.
That Europe.
Europe does value.
Oh yeah. If you like switch to. Yeah. Sorry. Where is it?
first question.
Mhm.
So you tell me drugs are not cheap enough in the developing world. Do you know what % of the developing world currently has access to essential medicines?
What do you mean by essential medicines?
Essential medicines meaning the most important drugs that they need to treat their particular condition. As in, someone who has malaria would need a drug to treat that malaria. Someone who has tuberculosis would need some kind of drug to treat that tuberculosis. What % of the developing world can afford drugs?
Wait, just to clarify, I'll answer that. But we're talking about diseases, right? So malaria,
Yeah.
other like tropical resistant diseases, right?
Right.
That's the biggest killer in the developing world.
Yes, absolutely. 50% of the
Okay.
disease burden, which is one reason why a lot of your terms don't apply, because most of the disease burden in the developing world is different than America. So even if they create better drugs for America,
Well, so
it doesn't
yeah,
spill
we
over
can
to
get
the
into that.
developing world.
That's a different thing. But
Okay, but
our evidence
my
indicates-
specific question is,
Yeah, sure.
how much of the developing world has access to drugs? The drugs they
Our evidence indicates that the prices are not low enough for most.
right,
of
but so I'm asking how many have access?
not enough.
61%. So
Yeah.
61% is pretty significant, right?
So what we say
You
is
can
that
cut that by a lot.
So-
If
yeah.
prices go up, there can be
Yeah.
a substantial decrease. That's most of the
we're
developing
not
world.
saying that no one has access to these drugs.
Okay.
It's that the drugs that they have access to are not good drugs. They're expired drugs. They're old drugs.
Okay, wait, but
They
that's
don't
on
belong.
donations. You told me they donate expired drugs. We're talking about the drugs they sell. That's an important distinction. Even if they're giving drugs for free that are expired, as long as they're selling essential medicines, that's what's most important.
Sure.
And as long as those essential medicines are cheap,
Well,
then
but
they have access.
what we say is that A, most of these are expired, and B,
Now, do
if
you
they-
have any evidence that says the drugs they're selling are expired? You read the drugs they're
No,
donating
I read
are
from The
expired.
Guardian that these companies have no incentive to sell them. That they
They have no
claim that
incentive to sell them?
They're researching into things like malaria, but because
Oh,
they
yes,
think it's
yes, we're
possible,
not talking
they're
about research,
doing it.
though. We're not talking about research. You're saying they're not doing additional research on these drugs. We're telling you that there are already a lot of really important drugs they've created. For example, current malaria medicines save 3 million lives every year. So, just because they're not doing additional research, as long as there are essential we have evidence that they're doing it, but regardless, as long as they already have essential medicines that save millions of lives and most people have access, if prices go up, less people have access.
So why would they stop selling this medicine?
We're not saying they stop selling these
Why would
We're
they
saying
sell
they
less?
profit maximize.
Why
Okay.
would they
So our
profit?
common law evidence says right now they're charging below marginal cost. And what that means is that the price to produce the drug is literally less than is less than the price they're actually charging it for.
Even though y'all have conceded that companies are profit
Wait,
maximizers.
more?
So what
No, it's
companies
more.
do
That's what I
are
mean. The
maximize
price to
profit.
produce the drug is more than the price they're selling it for. But that means that
Yeah,
they're not profit
that doesn't-
maximizing. If you're selling a drug below the cost that it is to produce that drug, you are losing money.
No, because
that
even,
is like
even though
basic
they're
economics.
selling it, even though they're losing production costs, they know that the costs that they make back in the long term are.
What are those long term? We're telling you they sell the drug less than the cost it takes to produce the
things
drug.
that you talk
How do
about,
they make
like
up the
PR
money?
with the UN and decreasing
Okay,
regulations.
right,
decreasing
exactly.
taxes.
But we tell you can only afford to do things for PR at the expense that you have so much money. If you're being pressured to make
No.
money now, what is a better way to get short-term returns? Getting better press, continued better press with the
our
UN,
manual
or
evidence- our manual
selling
evidence
drugs in the
indicates
United
these
States,
companies
or
are
increasing
so
prices.
profitable that they wouldn't have to cut these things. that
No,
are
your
marginally-
manual evidence says they
are
wouldn't cut
marginally
R&D because R&D is profitable for them.
Finds companies that have 30% profit
No.
margins in any other industry.
No.
That's
Your
what I'm
evidence says that when companies lose money, they continue their
That's what I'm
R&D
saying.
because their
They're not
R&D is
going to stop
profitable.
giving these
It is, but you
dumb
don't
companies
actually have
money.
evidence for this. You're just asserting they will continue it.
All right,
We have
that's
very
all.
clear evidence that they will increase prices.
Yeah, they're not.
Wait, is probably over? I had 45 seconds. Oh wait,
Are you sure?
I think I might have hit case, not
Oh, yeah.
sorry. Okay, we're taking prep time. We have 44 seconds of prep left.
All right. Is the pro ready? Yeah? Judges? Let's get started. They tell you not to weigh magnitude in this round. If you are living in the developing world, you are 39 times more likely to not have access to a drug. These people have subsistence farms. They can't get access to a drug. They can't get access to other treatment. There aren't hospitals, health clinics, or other resources. If you're poor in America, poor in the developing world, not the same thing whatsoever. Right now, we're telling you that companies are charging low humanitarian prices in the developing world, just 3% of what they charge in the United States, and that has been increasing global access to medicine by 4 to 7 times. They tell you that prices are not low enough. According to the WHO, 61% of people in the developing world do have access to these drugs. Clearly, that's a lot of people. That's because of UN pressure, and these companies have the flexibility to charge such low prices because their profit margins are so incredibly high. But what we tell you is that when revenue decreases by 26% after price controls are implemented, they're going to care more about their dollar signs than this kind of like maximizing humanitarian pressure. And remember, they completely concede that revenue decreases. That's a very clean link in today's round. And what Flint American University tells you is that when the revenue shoots down so much, there's an enormous amount of investor pressure to recoup those losses, and that means they jack up prices in the developing world. And Flint explicitly tells you that if they maximize profits, access will decrease by 51%, the cleanest impact in today's round for 3 reasons. First, on scope, we're affecting tens of millions of the most vulnerable people in the developing world. Second, on magnitude, if these people cannot access drugs, since they cannot go to hospitals, health clinics, or doctors, they have to face their condition, they might die. And third, prices is a prerequisite to innovation. At the point where prices are shooting up and access is shooting down, it doesn't matter if they innovate a lot with value-based, people still can't afford the medicine. But let's go on to value-based. What we tell you is that Trump actually wants reference-based pricing, not value-based pricing. Reference-based pricing for Europe, but only 2 countries in Europe have a value-based system, which means we're probably just going to like set reference prices, not value-based prices. But second, all the innovation that they would do would just be for America, not the developing world, because they tell you themselves it's not profitable to innovate for the developing world. Now to expired drugs. The WHO tells you that guidelines that say you cannot donate expired drugs have been in compliance 95% of the time. We're not donating these expired drugs at all. In fact, malaria donations have been saving 3 million lives every single year. On defense, they concede their naloxone, and they do not respond to the fact that discount programs by like places like Walmart, pharmacies, have been decreasing the price of generic drugs by 75%, and 45% of the largest, most blockbuster drugs are coming off a patent in the next year. They just tell you they're not the most profitable, no real good warranting there or evidence. For these reasons, we strongly urge you negate. To negate.
Starting on weighing. They say it's bad to be poor in the developing world, but guess what? It's also really bad to be poor in America. If I'm a poor American, I still can't have access to drugs with life-saving medicines. I still live in very dire poverty. But the really crucial piece of weight that they drop is the meta-weighing on probability, which Daniel does. What they concede is that when there are price controls, the price of drugs will definitely go down. There's a 100% probability. That means that our evidence, it tells us, is the only one that gives you a 100% probability of expanding access of pharmaceuticals. On their case, if you want to vote for access in the developing world, you vote for us. Because right now, the incentive of companies is to price gouge and to make worse drugs. However, when you switch to a price value system, you make the incentive to make better innovations because that is what they get the most amount of money from. Our Stanford evidence indicates that this is true because in Europe, where they have a value-based system, they far outpace American innovation. They give 2 responses. The first is that it's not a value, is that it's a reference-based system, but we will reference it based off of Europe. Then they say it's only 2 countries. No.
no, our evidence says it is most of them. Finally, they say these are only for American diseases, but a lot of these American diseases, like AIDS and tuberculosis, also kill millions of people in the developing world. We still get a much better link into their impacts. We save millions of lives. Finally, on defense on their case, remember that they are always profit maximizing. Even if they lose some money, they still feel that the benefits to PR outweigh whatever the small costs are. The manual evidence still applies because obviously, because maybe it's talking about R&D, but the production of drugs still costs a very small amount of money. Therefore, they aren't losing that much by selling them to the developing world. Let's go back to our case. What we tell you is that the price of drugs is far too high right now. Americans pay 2 times higher than the rest of the world. The reason why that is so crucial because at the bottom of case, our evidence indicates that 25% of Americans can't pay for their drugs, and as a result, 125,000 people die each year. First, they say most drugs are generic, but remember, it is the expensive ones that stay in patent. They say, well, drugs are leaving patent. That is just not true. Remember Bernstein, which goes dropped, which is spending on the top 1% of drugs accounts for 32% of all spending, and the warranting is clear because when I have a life-saving drug, I want to continually extend patents. They do that by paying generic companies so that it can keep high profits. That is why these drugs do not become affordable, and that is why you price out Americans, and that is why we affirm.
Ready for grand call. Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just talk about the weighing really quick. To be a poor American being like some poor in the developing world. So you never really interact with our warranting, which is that if you're in the developing world and you're like a subsistence farmer, mostly, you don't have access, or you don't have as great access to hospitals, health clinics, or doctors. Whereas in America, even if you don't get that drug, right, drug spending only accounts for 10% of healthcare spending in the US. So you could still go to a doctor, health clinic, emergency room, right?
And 92% of people still have insurance that can cover that in America compared to 10% in the development.
And that's like the most basic comparison, right? Like poverty is also
I'm not gonna
much worse in the developing
hold on. I'm not gonna dispute y'all's facts. They're great. What I am disputing is the ethical norms that you're trying to set by saying that we really should be ascertaining the marginal difference between being poor in the developing world and the U.S. Sorry, I'm
of course. I'll let you speak.
Obviously, we are not saying that being poor in the U.S. and the developing world is the same. Obviously, there is a difference. But coming from a privileged position, we would say that none of us are really that well able to, sort of value that. What we would say is that as policymakers, we really should value what problems we can definitely solve. We definitely can solve the access issue.
All right, but let's say a bill was presented to you today, and like you had the power, you were the president. Let's say like this bill was passed by Congress, so like implement price controls. You knew 100%, maybe more Americans will get access. That might be true. But you would decimate access in the developing world. Like 51% of people lose access.
This is the problem.
If both of those things were true, what would you do? If you were like a moral, privileged
the weighing
person?
that Daniel does and that I extend that gets dropped is, as rational policymakers, we value things that are likely to happen.
We value probability too, and we think we're winning on
probability. Like we are not spending on running asteroids and hitting the Earth, even though that would be the biggest impact, because it's not probable.
Exactly.
Right, but okay, fine. I agree. If there was no probability that what we said is true, you should not vote for us. But we say as long as we are winning that the developing world loses access, you should be voting on the developing world rather than America, because $1 a day is not the same as $8 an hour. And we tell you that there are a lot of other structural issues like a lack of health care and a lack of good doctors and a lack of other kinds of treatment. That means you should inherently value the developing world as long as you believe both impacts are
obviously in the debate,
but the way
links need to be true.
Wait. But the way that you're pegging this is we're talking about Americans who have access to healthcare. Like remember, we were talking about the 8% of Americans who don't have health care.
Right, but what I'm saying is like insofar as our links are probable, because you just give one response. You say they're gouging right now. We've given you 2 responses to that, right? Like for one, they're charging just 3% of the developing world compared to what they do in America, and like that's been increasing global access, right? And you say they're price gouging. That's your only response to say our link isn't probable.
Hold on. I'm
so
not
if we
I'm not trying to relitigate more.
Sure. We're talking about weighing. That's okay.
You always want to you're going to pass what you think you have the highest chance of solving. No policymaker would be like, well,
sure,
I would have this great impact on.
I understand, but what I'm saying is at the end of the day, I'm saying weighing has to be okay. I understand. Well, probability is obviously important, but we're saying if you believe both sides have on their impact, you then have to default to which impact is more important. And you cannot possibly say that the subsistence farmers in the developing world have the same access to medical care than the 8% of Americans who don't have insurance.
We are not. We are just saying that the likelihood of your impact is much less than the likelihood of our impact.
Okay,
Okay,
that's fine. And we're going to take the rest of our time. Okay, that's all our time. Lab opponents ready? Judges? Remember, the weighing the developing world is most important. They can't access other kinds of healthcare, and the poor in America are not the same as the poor in the developing world. $1 a day is not the same as $8 an hour. They just say to weigh on probability, so as long as we are winning our link chain, we are winning this round. So let's go to our link chain. We tell you about the commoner evidence, that right now they're charging just 3% of the prices they charge in the United States in the developing world below their marginal cost. We tell you about the IPI evidence, that that's increasing global access to drugs by 4 to 7 times, as the poor in the developing world have 61% of them do have access. And then we tell you that they, again, uncontested, with Sood, that revenue will decrease 26% with price controls. And then we tell you that right now, that although right now they are looking to humanitarianism because they have the flexibility with such high profits to be able to do some humanitarian maximizing initiatives rather than profit maximizing initiatives, when they lose a lot of money in the short term, they look to short-term returns. And we tell you that's really important because investors tell them you need to make up that money, and that's where the Flynn evidence comes in. It tells you they'll jack up prices in the developing world in order to make up for lost sales in America. And we tell you specifically, again, uncontested by them, that when they maximize profit in the developing world, 51% of them lose access to drugs. This is crucial because he tells you that with the high income inequality, this will be profitable. We tell you this is the biggest impact of the round. We affect tens of millions of the poorest, most vulnerable people who do not have other kinds of medical treatments, if they do not get pharmaceuticals. And at the end of the day, their only link into the developing world is on innovation. But remember what Elias tells you in summary, that prices are a prerequisite to innovation. As long as you are decimating access to the developing world, no matter how much good innovation you can create, they cannot afford it. But then on their value-based pricing, they just tell you most European countries have it and will index them, but their evidence only mentions 2 of them. So you cannot just say it's going to be entirely value-based. But more importantly is what they concede in Crossfire, which is that the disease burden in America is not the same as the disease burden in the developing world, and it's not as profitable to innovate for them. They tell you there are certain drugs that may affect both. But we tell you at the end of the day, it is not, most drugs still do not affect like the tropical diseases that they have. But at the end of the day, we tell you, even if they're winning their entire case on America, they are not winning this round because you're decimating access to the most poor and vulnerable people that we must prioritize in this round. Thus, we urge you to negate.
All right. Is everyone ready? Starting on Wayne. Prefer our impacts because as rational policymakers, we say that you should vote for the highest chance of whatever you can solve. There is a 100% chance that we solve all of our impacts because they've conceded that we will increase access to 125,000 people. At that point, in Final Focus, they themselves have conceded that we should look to probability first, so automatically you should sign your ballot for the pro because we are putting link defense on their case, which takes out their chance of offense. We say that even though people in the developing world are worse off, and we do not justify that is worse off, we agree, we just say that as policymakers, we should not be just comparing the exact margins, but saying, can we solve this problem? And that is why we encourage probability. Here's how we win our impact. Remember that prices in the US are twice as high as anywhere else in the developed world with countries with price controls because we don't have a way to control prices. They're out of control, and as a result, 1/4 of Americans cannot afford their drugs, and as a result, 125,000 die every single year. Easy way to vote for us. You solve all of this problem by affirming and restore access. But even if you want to vote for them under their own framing, we win that framing by winning the innovation debate. Remember that right now the incentive is to gouge on prices and not to develop innovative drugs. That's why 90% don't do any clinical good. However, most countries in Europe use value-based systems. They say only 2, but every single price control is a value-based system because the way you ascertain prices is by looking at the value. That is why our evidence indicates that most of them use value-based systems. So when we reference to them, we automatically use a value-based system. They say that won't help because developing diseases aren't first world diseases. That does not matter because they themselves concede that half of those diseases that people in the developing world suffer from are things like tuberculosis and HIV/AIDS, concerns both in the developing and developed world. The incentive will still be there if you affirm. Remember, our Stanford evidence indicates that you shift the incentives and Europe companies outpace, which empirically proves we will see more innovation. Their prerequisite about prices does not matter because in the long term prices will always go down for medications, like for example HIV, so we still have long term solvency on innovation. But we also are going to win their links on the defense. So first on this idea of decreasing revenue. Remember they say you decrease revenue 26%, but they drop a manual says that doesn't even come close to the 50% of revenue that they would need to cut R&D. And if they're not going to cut R&D because they won't lose revenue, they certainly won't cut production to the developing world, which costs them even much less. Developing world prices will, the cost just simply will not outweigh the benefits. Finally, they conceded that they are profit maximizing, which means that they will never cut off profits because in the end it is profitable because of things like PR. The companies, the people, the executives of these companies know that it is profit maximizing, so they know that by cutting off these drugs they would lose profit, which is why they will never do this and why the link will not come true.